Thank you. What I want to do, just so you'll know what the next 3 weeks look like, I want to actually go through Raymond Moody's. I don't want to call this guy Raymond Barry. Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. You've all read it. If you haven't, you get it and read it. It's the kind of the standard beginning book of this literature. We're going to talk about near-death experiences today. Next week, Charlie Kennard, who's had such an experience, is willing to talk about it, and he's going to come talk about it to class. And then the rest of that time next week, what we'll do is we'll actually talk about just anything you want to talk about with regard to near-death experiences. And then the week after that, which is Palm Sunday, I'm going to actually try to give you a little bit of a notion of what I think we can actually know about what heaven is like. We're going to do something very unique and original. We're going to go to the Bible. And believe it or not, the Bible does not tell us a lot about what heaven is like. But there are some clues. And if you're interested, just go look at the funeral rite in the Book of Common Prayer and look at the passages that are listed for reading at funerals. They're all either from John, the Gospels are all from John, and the revelation of John figures prominently in the other readings. So you read all those passages, you've got a pretty good notion of what the New Testament actually says about eternal life. So any questions, comments, thoughts about what we've done to date? Okay. Want to do what I always do, share with you books that I think are really, really important. I'm just going to refer you to 3 books this morning. One is, and this is the book that started the whole thing. It was Life After Life by Raymond Moody. It's a very easy book to read. He was the first guy who I don't think he actually termed the coin near-death experience, but he was the first one to really popularize it, to make it a common term. And of course, this book is nearly 50 years old now. This is many editions later, and that will matter. But he was the guy, he actually was a philosophy professor, has a PhD in philosophy, and became interested in these experiences and went back to medical school and became a psychiatrist. And began gathering data on stories about people having near-death experiences. Now, it's significant to know, I know I've shared this with you before, standard scientific method is not a whole lot of use here, because you can't put somebody under laboratory circumstances, kill them, and then ask them what happened. I mean, there's actually a movie about that. It's a couple of movies. There's an old movie starring Kiefer Sutherland and Julia Roberts made back in the 80s, I think. And they remade that movie about a bunch of medical students trying to, they would kill each other and then they come back and say, well, don't do that. That is not what God has in mind. It's very, very dangerous. But the point is that you can't know these things in a conventional method. So the only resources we actually have are listening to the stories of people who have had these experiences. Now, the interesting thing is these stories have become immensely more common. And the reason they become more common is that we have the technology now to bring people back from the brink of death. 100 years ago, most of the folk who were brought back would simply have died. It's as simple as that, because they didn't have the methodologies to bring them back. And what Moody observes is that there's incredible commonality between the reports that people make. And that's what we're going to be looking at briefly this morning. Now, the guy he listened to, I never heard of this guy until recently. The guy he listened to who convinced him that there was something to this is this guy, George Ritchie. And if you'll note, when you get into the book, it's kind of a fascinating thing. The book is dedicated to George Ritchie. And George Ritchie was in the Army in Abilene, Texas, of all places, during the Second War, and got a horrible fever and died. He was actually slated to go to medical school. The Army was going to send him to medical school, and he tells the whole story in here. This little book, so far as I can discern, is no longer in print. Several of his other books are. But you can find this. You know, you can go to Amazon and get used books. The other place that I like to go is alibris.com, alibris.com. And man, if you can't find a used book there, you can't find it. So this is an easily gotten book, but he had an extraordinary experience. It's like something out of Dante. He dies. He doesn't realize that he's dead. He's in the hospital ward at this camp in Abilene. He finally begins to understand what's going on. And then he goes looking for his body, and the only way he could recognize his body, because, you know, like a lot of military establishments, one building looks like another. They were put up for very functional reasons. He finds a body, a corpse, with a sheet pulled over its head, and the only way he can tell it's him is that he sees his fraternity ring. And when he sees the fraternity ring, he recognizes his ring and realizes that's my body there, and then a light comes into the room. And he's told that you're in the presence of the Son of God, stand up. And then he begins to have extraordinary experiences, all of which come out in all the specific details come out very much in Moody's description. But I would really encourage you to read this book. Now, I want to share something which may shake you up a little bit. Sometimes when you read this stuff, you get the impression, it doesn't matter what you do with your life. God loves everybody. He's going to forgive everything. Just don't worry about it. Well, the truth of the matter is, what he does is the being of light that he thinks is Christ shows him people in hell. But hell is not, and this is fascinating, hell is not a gruesome place of fire and brimstone where you're infinitely and eternally tortured for your sins. Hell is that you can't let go of this life. And so he sees, for example, what you and I would think of as ghosts, following people in this life around. A couple of examples, goes to a bar, and there are all these people hanging around, all these ghosts hanging around people drinking, and the moment they put their glass down, they try to grab the glass so they can get the drink. Well, they can't grab, they don't have a material body any longer. They can no longer get the drink. The other one that I found really interesting is people following people around, continuing to give them unsolicited and obviously unwanted advice. Well, I told you that was going to happen. I told you, like a parent who won't let a child go. But the point is that these are folk who cannot let go of an obsession about this life. And then in the experience, he backs up and he realizes I remember all the word angel means in Greek, angelos, is messenger. It doesn't tell us that they have wings and all that. We don't, all they are is conscious beings with good intention. Even in that hell, there are beings watching out for those folk, waiting for them to let go. So there is the thing I really like about this book is there's a great deal of hope in it, but it's also realistic. You got to live your life well. Now, that's a much lower threshold than we tend to think. I don't know if this is true of everybody, but preachers' kids, and by the time you're a fourth generation preacher's kid, you're as neurotic as they come. Preachers' kids are just convinced that we're never going to make the grade. There's nothing we can do that's good enough, and I really am serious. I think most preachers' kids just have this sense that we're damn sinners, and that's that. That's manifestly not what he sees. Now, the other thing he sees, two other stages in this, is one is he goes to what amounts to an astral university, a celestial university. And it's a place of bliss and wonderful learning. And we're going to see why that matters here in a second. And then he gets a glimpse, only a glimpse, but of the city of God. And when we look at Revelation 2 weeks from now, you'll see salvation ain't something that happens to you and me alone. It's something that happens to you and me together. The temptation to think that salvation is my knowing that I'm going to be okay at the judgment and I won't have to spend an eternity in hell. It's a very narrow understanding of salvation. Salvation, in fact, is something that we experience together. And he gets a glimpse of that. Anyway, this guy was also a psychiatrist. Interestingly, his later books are in print. This is the seminal book. I don't know why this thing's out of print, but I cannot recommend it to you highly enough. It doesn't really matter what you think of it. Again, one of the things that marks these experiences, and this is true of mystical experiences as well, you can tell somebody who's had one of these experiences, well, I don't believe you. And they'll say, well, that's your option, but it doesn't really matter. I believe me, and I can tell you where I was is more real than where I am now. And that is, again, I'm increasingly convinced that near-death experiences are a subcategory of mystical experiences, and if we have time, I'll get to all that. Now, the other book you just got to read, and interestingly, the foreword of this book is written by this, is Eben Alexander, Proof of Heaven. The title is egregious, but get the book. It's a fascinating experience. And again, a medical doctor, the guy was a brain surgeon. I can't try to get all the medical terms into his title, but he was trained at Duke, taught at Harvard, nice credentials. And he has an extraordinary experience, which he describes in that book, Proof of Heaven. And he's written several other books, which I really recommend you read. They're really quite fascinating. By the way, he's an Episcopalian. I'm not sure but these guys obviously all know each other, and they take each other's experiences very, very seriously. Now, say it again. Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander. Eben is E-B-A-N, Alexander is Alexander. If you read those three books, you've got a real good foundation for this stuff. And by the way, as you're probably aware of the literature, I've got at least 65 or 70 books on this stuff at home. The literature is just burgeoning. When you get just even an idiot's guide to near-death experiences, which I have. Yes, ma'am.
Are all these experiences from people with a Christian background?
No.
No? Okay, because the one book that I read that you had read, the woman was Jewish, and that completely threw me.
Well, my time here is short, so what are you going to do, fire me if I tell you what I think? Human beings, very concerned about their tribe, will draw the conclusion that they're uniquely precious to God. God doesn't think that. In fact, part of what's fascinating about these experiences, because not everybody who flatlines has a near-death experience, part of what's fascinating about them is that atheists and agnostics have the experience, and devout Christians oftentimes don't. I mean, it's utterly unpredictable who's going to have the experience. But the other piece of it is the experiences occur in all the traditions. Now, there are some differences between Eastern and Western traditions in the experiences that people have. One of the things on this sheet is you encounter a being of light. Now, if you're raised in a Christian household, you're probably going to think this is the Christ or this is Jesus. Now, Richie actually was told, stand up in the presence of the Son of God. So he actually was told, this is the Son of God, but it doesn't say it's the only Son. So my own conviction is, Jesus, never forget. That's why you got to always begin with the Gospel of Mark and end with the Gospel of John. In the Gospel of Mark, the young ruler comes up to him and says, good teacher. And Jesus, without skipping a beat, says, why do you call me good? No one is good but the Father in heaven. And in John, you hear, greater works than I have done, you will do. I mean, the exact status of Jesus as the Christ of the Nicene Creed may not come true in these experiences. But you remember, I don't know if you remember, I shared with you that thing about the incredible explosion of people who've had mystical experiences in the last 50 years. My own conviction is part of what's happening with these experiences is the whole globe is being made conscious of the presence of God in ways we haven't known before. Now, so I am profoundly convinced that God calls good people from all traditions to dwell eternally with him. You know, and I had forgotten doing this, but I was in a clergy meeting one time, and we had another priest who went to Trinity School for Ministry, which is really not an Episcopal seminary. Over 80% of their students are quote-unquote Anglican, not Episcopalian, and you all know what that means. But in this meeting, this guy was arguing that Gandhi went to hell because he hadn't accepted Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. And apparently I crossed my arms and then said, well, I don't want to go to heaven. Because, man, if they won't let Gandhi in, I don't want to go there. I'm scared. I really think Gandhi was probably the greatest man of the 20th century. So I'll give you more books that talk about people from other traditions going to heaven. Now, in all seriousness, this is one of those things that makes people really nervous. If I were your brand new rector and planned on being with you for 10 or 15 years, I probably wouldn't have been that transparent. And I can remember having a parishioner in the Woodlands who insisted that Gandhi had a chance to go to heaven, but they had to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior upon his death, and if he didn't, he wouldn't. Gandhi began every day reading the Bible, you know. So I think Jesus is far less concerned about the loyalty oath than we are. Does that answer your question? Y'all want me to stay? Let me run through these. We've only got about 10 minutes. And again, a lot of these are going to be very similar to mystical experiences when we get to them. Ineffability. If I say to you the sky is blue, it's not that you know that's so because the sky is blue. It's you know that's so to be so because we have the same definition of the color blue. Now, I use that specific example because there is some evidence that when Homer was writing, people didn't see blue. I don't understand this at all. But, you know, believe it, I know that to an artist that makes no sense, but they apparently saw the sea as red. Now, the only point I'm making is we have a common experience of the color blue, so if I say blue, you think blue. Now, how many of you have been to heaven? I mean, the point of it is these experiences are from a realm that most of us don't experience. And so when we describe these experiences, or when these people describe these experiences, they're invariably saying, I don't have words to tell you what happened, but I can tell you this is what I experienced, and they do the best they can. And what they also sometimes discover, coming back to this life, is that they themselves can't really understand what they experience because it's so outside usual waking experience. So they're ineffable. Hearing the news. One of the things that these people apparently have in common is that they hear somebody say they're gone, they're flatlining. Feelings of peace and quiet. All mothers of small children want this. I began to experience the most wonderful feelings. I couldn't feel a thing in the world except peace, comfort, ease, just quietness. Now this one fascinates me. The noise, a loud ringing. It could be described as a buzzing, and I was in sort of a whirling state. This is also a mystical experience, a religious experience. So you don't have to be somebody who's on the edge of death to have this experience. In other cases, the auditory effects seemed to take a more pleasant musical form. I would hear what seemed to be bells tingling a long way off as if drifting through the wind. Again, one of the weird things, I did not finish my PhD at the University of Chicago, but I will be forever grateful for those 4 years. Not so much because of the professors I had as because of the students I met. Because as I've said to you before, who's stupid enough to spend that kind of money getting a degree you can't do anything with? People who really have no alternative. And so one of the things that happened to me at the University of Chicago was all these experiences, I've known people who have had them. And the bell thing is an example. Now, you all know the dark tunnel. in one of the Shrek movies, and Eddie Murphy can't but be funny, but he's playing the donkey, and he's going to leave Shrek, but he's afraid Shrek's going to die. And I don't remember the reason, but I remember he looks at him in that Eddie Murphy way. He says, "If you see a tunnel with light at the end of it, don't go in it." But the tunnel, see, and what's fascinating about that is the dark tunnel has become just kind of a permanent fixture in the collective consciousness of our culture. I had a feeling that I was moving through a deep, very dark valley. The darkness was so deep and impenetrable that I could see absolutely nothing, but this was the most wonderful, worry-free experience you can matter. So you find yourself in this tunnel, out of body. And this is fascinating because part of what all this is doing is if you accept these at all, you can't live in a materialist universe anymore. You still live in a material universe, but you can't argue that the only reality that we have is a material reality. So, for example, I saw an interview with a quantum physicist and a fascinating Buddhist guy named B. Alan Wallace. And the physicist was maintaining that because he could account for every atom and molecule in a corpse when a person died, there's no consciousness beyond this life. And when B. Alan Wallace, who's a very fascinating, brilliant guy, I mean, you can nearly see his eyes rolling as if you'd gotten the jackpot in Las Vegas. It was just such a silly argument, if you accept that this other world exists. Far and away, the majority of my subjects report that they did find themselves in another body upon release from the physical one. This new body is one of the 2 or 3 aspects of death experiences in which the inadequacy of human language permits the greatest obstacles. And guess what he calls this body? The spiritual body. Do you remember my talking, I think it was just last week, about if there's a body with a soul, there's a body with a spirit? And the way it gets translated in most of our Bibles is a physical body, there's a spiritual body, there's a natural body, there's a physical body. But the term is soma panukikon, a body with a spirit. Well, here's the spiritual body. Almost everyone remarks upon the timelessness of this out-of-body state. Successive moments cease, that you can't measure them the same way. This body, and this one really interested me, this body is sometimes described as an energy pattern. Now, I'm not going to go far down this path because I haven't had time to think it through, and I'm not sure I'm smart enough to anyway. But I got a shirt at home which says "You matter." Pam got this for me for Christmas. Unless you multiply yourself by the speed of light squared, then you energy. And basically what physicists will tell us is all what you and I think of as matter is energy slowed down to a certain level of vibration. So it's a fascinating thing that people have these experiences, and they're still conscious that they exist as a person, but they see themselves, they experience themselves as a form of energy. Harry?
Can people have some of these same effects in dreaming?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if your dreams might take you to some of these same experiences.
The answer is yes. And my own conviction is there are different levels of dreams. There are dreams that are a result of you really shouldn't have had that extra piece of pizza. And then there are dreams that take you to a deep and an extraordinary level. And I've had, 8 or 10 of those dreams during the course of my life, and some which, frankly, melded into waking experience. I mean, I would wake up and the experience would continue. It's worth noting, and I can't bring up the word, but the word for dream in Greek is the same as the word for vision. So, again, these experiences are had by these people because they flatline or they get very close to death. But there are other people who have had these experiences without flatlining. But Harry, absolutely. Now, something else that's really interesting, direct transfer of thoughts. Communication occurs in these states, but it's not a matter of my speaking with my mouth and you're hearing words. I can directly transfer thoughts to you and you to me. So what you and I might think of in this life as mental telepathy actually occurs to these people, and they're able to communicate simply through their thoughts. They can ask questions and the being of light will answer. Meeting others. Now this is one place, these are the last two I want to get through these last three. Meeting others. They become aware of the presence of other spiritual beings in their vicinity. Sometimes these are people they don't know, sometimes the people you know and love who have gone before you. As my dad was dying, he was really looking forward to seeing my mom and his mom and dad. And my conviction is that he did. So, now, interestingly, I can't go too far down this road, but I'm not sure. This may be one of those places where Western experiences are a little different from Eastern experiences. I'm not sure of that. The being of light. The encounter with a very bright light and unearthly brilliance, many make the specific point that it does not in any way hurt their eyes. It's the description of the Transfiguration in the New Testament. And we're going to be preaching about that in a few minutes. Despite the light's unusual manifestation, not one person has expressed any doubt whatsoever that it was a being of light. Not only that, it was a personal being. It has a very definite personality. And then this is what's interesting. What have you done with your life to show me? The being, invite you into a life review. Now, that would automatically, my Calvinist background coming out, scare the bejeebers out of me. I'm sure I didn't know it well enough. I'm sure I did. I thought I was dying in Colorado at one point. I wasn't. I just had a CPAP machine going weird on me. But I was having a hard time breathing at 10,000 feet, and I looked at Pam, and I said, Pam, I really was doing my best. I mean, I've got this anxiety that I just haven't done well enough. All insist that this question, ultimate and profound as it may be in its emotional impact, is not at all asked in condemnation. They still feel the total love and acceptance coming from the light, no matter what their answer may be. Now, interestingly, the light often, especially with the folks you read about in this literature, sends people back because their work isn't done. It's not your time. A mother with 3 kids at home, that sort of thing. And then the review. The being presents the person a panoramic review of his life. His only intention is to provoke reflection, and then this fascinates me. The being seems to stress the importance of 2 things in life: learning to love other people, but it's not just that, and acquiring knowledge. Now, I'm going to end on this. You all know I have a daughter named Nyssa, N-Y-S-S-A. She's named after Gregory of Nyssa. In the early 5th century, Gregory argued that the purpose of human life was to come into union with God. God is infinite, therefore we will grow infinitely through time and space. And I suddenly realized heaven ain't going to be boring. But what it means is we have an eternity to grow in understanding how better to love, and an eternity to grow in increasing our knowledge. And going back to this book, it's fascinating that one of the places he goes looks like a supernatural university where people are learning. And he makes an interesting observation. This is true. Think about the number of major discoveries in the course of human events that have occurred simultaneously in different places in the globe. And he's arguing that what's going on in that university somehow gets transmitted to this university. The 3 people I've referred you to are all doctors, medical doctors. 2 of them have had their own very profound experiences, and we'll pick up from there because I don't want to tick the choir off. Lisa.
There's one other site we can go to for used books. It's called Thrift Books, like thrift stores, thrift books, and they have a lot of the older books and used books.
That's wonderful to hear. That is wonderful. I got to tell you, there are things about the internet that give me great pause, but boy, if you're looking for used books, it cannot be beaten. So thrift books, did everybody hear that? So you'll all have read all 3 of these books next week, right? Go in peace, love, and serve the Lord.